Mr. Okafor lived in a remote village. He was a man whose means of livelihood was hunting. He was renowned and recognized as the greatest hunter of his time. Mr. Okafor lived with an orphan called Nnamdi in Ameke village of Umualo town. Both of them often went to the bush for hunting. Nnamdi was dark in complexion, tall, and handsome. He was equally an obedient child who had not disobeyed Mr. Okafor on any occasion. And that made Mr. Okafor to be interested and nurtured him fairly. One evening, Mr. Okafor, the great hunter, set out to the forest to hunt. Nnamdi could not go with him that day because he was told by Mr. Okafor to stay at home to embark on some domestic work. After he had finished, he became tired and sat under a guava tree to rest a while. While he rested, a deep thought came into his mind. The thought was about his mother. He asked himself, who could be my mother? Would his mother be found? If he even had a mother at all, or whether she was still alive. He pondered on these questions and was seriously disturbed due to the force in which it exhibited on him. These questions rang continually in his memory. He had no rest, though he attempted to answer the questions by himself. In attempt to answer these questions, he muttered to himself, "It could be that my mother had a dispute with my father, and they had divorced. But at least I am supposed to have known her by now. I have neither seen her nor known her whereabouts." Since he could not get a clear answer, he decided to stop there and waited for Mr. Okafor to come back and tell him his mother's whereabouts. Nnamdi sat on a wooden chair while he eagerly waited for Mr. Okafor to have an appropriate answer to his questions. Still waiting, he heard footsteps from the entrance of the compound. He peeped and sighted Mr. Okafor coming with a very big antelope on his head and 3 grass cutters on his hand. Nnamdi quickly ran towards him, embraced him, and collected the grass cutters from him. Nnamdi was happy that Mr. Okafor was back. After he had taken his bath and rested, Nnamdi came into the room and sat on a stool opposite Mr. Okafor. He started by saying, "Papa, if you would not mind, can I ask you some questions?" "Go ahead with your questions, Nnam. I am attentive," Mr. Okafor curiously responded. Nnam was the name he often called him. "Who is my mother? Where is she? Do I still have a mother?" Nnamdi asked directly as it came to him. Mr. Okafor was filled with pity and emotion. Imagined why such questions was coming to him at that moment. "I don't know the answer to your questions," he replied pitifully. The reply made Nnamdi to tremble the more. He felt so hurt and sorrowful as tears flowed from his eyes like a river. After he had cried for a brief moment, Mr. Okafor consoled him and told him his story. "Well, I have a story to tell you," Mr. Okafor reassured and continued as he vividly remembered. "One day, I set out to Agwaba forest to hunt, as it is my normal business. While in the bush, I overheard a voice crying, and then I walked towards the direction, very ready to shoot, but the cry persisted, and I listened carefully and discovered that it was the cry of a baby. I later reached the scene and found you lying helpless on the ground. I was bewildered at the sight while imagining what could have brought you there and how you were preserved from being devoured by the wild animals. Immediately, I heard a voice which said, Pick up the child and train him. He is a destined child. He narrated while he shook his head. Fear gripped me. Though I summoned courage, I carried you and took you to my house. I bathed you and wrapped you with clothes. Nnamdi couldn't help bursting into a profound and ceaseless weeping. After much consolation, he sat up and showed sign of gratefulness to Mr. Okafor. Thank you, Papa, for saving me and for all your kindness to me. You are indeed a man of integrity. I so much appreciate you. God will reward you and I will also pay you back in return. Nnam assured Mr. Okafor. Papa, is there any way that I can know the full detail of my parents and what happened to them? Mr. Okafor quickly remembered the wise man called Ezonwa, whose name was known in the land of Agwoba. Ezonwa was gifted with a lot of charisma. He detects what happened in the future and past. He had the spirit of discernment and was filled with wisdom. Though he lived miles away from his village, Umudim of Agwoba land, Mr. Okafor promised to take Nnamdi to the wise man's place after 2 market days. It was a cool evening. Nnamdi and Mr. Okafor had their supper. They both cracked jokes and Mr. Okafor narrated his stories on how he fought and killed a leopard and 2 giraffes in one particular night. While this was going on, Nnamdi dozed off and fell asleep. He was into a very deep sleep and dreamt of how he walked in a lonely place very far from Ameke village. While he was walking, a woman suddenly appeared. My son, where are you going to? And what are you looking for? The young woman questioned. Nnamdi walked towards her in fear and trembling. Nnamdi, you are my son. I gave birth to you under serious pains and sorrow of mind. I only heard your cry and gave you a name, which was Ahamefuna. Immediately, I gave up the ghost. She said this pathetically. But my son, don't be discouraged. I urge you to be determined because you are a destined child. You will be a king in the land of Umudike, which is your father's land, she continued. Your father was killed while he tried to protect me from being killed like other pregnant women in the entire land of Umudike. When she said this, tears profusely ran down Nnamdi's cheeks. Mommy, can you be resuscitated again? Asked sorrowful Nnamdi, who felt like being forever with his mom. No, my son, I can't, she replied pathetically. Both of them rejoiced because they had seen each other for the first time. They were equally sad because of their distant relationship. Mr. Okafor woke up when he heard the cock crow. He tapped Nnamdi and woke him up. When he woke up and discovered that all what happened to him was in the dream, he told Mr. Okafor his dream. He was astonished. However, they were encouraged through the dream to march on.
Moral lesson: in a world often filled with indifference, Mr. Okafor's story reminds us of the transformative power of love and empathy.